Betrayal on my wedding day. My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had imagined that moment thousands of times. Not the dress, not the vows, but the look on my parents' faces as they saw me walking down the aisle. Mom would cry, Dad would nod approvingly. I had convinced myself that no matter what, they would be there. But they weren't. I still remember that moment vividly. Standing in front of the mirror in the dressing room, running my fingers over the lace sleeves of my wedding dress, the dress I had altered myself to fit perfectly. I wasn't nervous about marrying Daniel, he was my rock. But I trembled with a different fear. Would they come? The night before, I had sent a final message, one last plea. Please just come, just for an hour. Sophie can wait. No reply, no call, no promise. Just cold silence, as if I had never existed in their world. The ceremony was held in an old barn, adorned with strings of warm golden lights. Daniel had hung each strand himself, trying to make the space as cozy as possible. He always did everything he could to make me feel loved, so unlike the people who had brought me into this world. I had reserved 2 seats in the front row, with small name cards, Robert and Linda Pierce. But as the ceremony began, those seats remained empty. I told myself maybe they were just late. Maybe they were on their way. I clenched my bouquet of daisies, forcing myself to walk down the seemingly endless aisle. Then, halfway through, my phone vibrated in my dress pocket. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. Sophie Pierce had just posted a photo. I clicked on it. A vibrant picture. Sophie stood in the middle of a birthday party, holding a wine glass in one hand, a sparkler in the other. Mom had her arm around her, beaming. Behind them, Dad was cutting Sophie's birthday cake, the cake they had chosen over attending my wedding. The timestamp read, 1:58 p.m. 2 minutes before my wedding began, they were there, laughing, celebrating, happy. While I stood here, waiting in silent devastation. Maybe I'd always known. Maybe deep down, I had understood that I was never their first choice. But seeing it with my own eyes, in the exact moment they should have been with me, was a pain beyond words. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. All I could do was keep moving forward. I walked down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. I smiled as I recited my vows to Daniel, said I do, in the steadiest voice I could muster, even as the hole in my heart widened. When we kissed and applause erupted around us, all I could see were the 2 empty chairs, a glaring reminder that I had never truly belonged to that family. The reception was lively. People laughed, clinked glasses, danced under the shimmering lights. I laughed too. I raised my glass. But inside, I knew everything had changed forever. Around 8 in the evening, I stepped outside, standing under the porch, letting the drizzle soak my dress. I couldn't pretend anymore. They weren't coming. Daniel found me there, quietly draping his jacket over my shoulders. His arms wrapped around me, a silent reassurance that I wasn't alone. They didn't come, I whispered, saying the truth out loud for the first time. Daniel didn't ask. Who? He knew. He had always known, perhaps even better than I had. They chose Sophie. I choked out, unable to mask the pain. Daniel's grip tightened, his eyes burning with fury on my behalf. After everything you've done for them, and this is how they treat you? I took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep into my skin, then whispered the words I had waited so long to say. I'm done. I'm not supporting them anymore, not a single cent. Daniel didn't try to talk me out of it, he just nodded, as if this was the most righteous decision I had ever made. The rain fell harder, washing away every expectation, every longing I had ever placed on them. I was no longer the daughter who carried everything for them. I was Maya, and for the first time in my life, I chose myself. Cutting ties. I'm not their bank anymore. After the wedding, I didn't wait for an apology. I knew my parents too well. They weren't the kind to admit fault. They would never acknowledge that choosing Sophie's birthday cake over my wedding was a mistake. But even though I had braced myself, I still wasn't prepared for their reaction when I cut off financial support. 3 days after the wedding, my phone buzzed while Daniel and I were still surrounded by unpacked boxes in our small apartment. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Dad. My stomach twisted. Daniel looked up from his book, concern in his eyes. "You don't have to answer." But I did. A part of me was still foolishly hopeful, hoping he would say, "I'm sorry." Hoping my mom would grab the phone, crying, saying they had been wrong, that they loved me. But the first thing I heard was an enraged growl. "Maya, what the hell do you think you're doing?" No. Hello. No, how are you? No mention of the wedding they had skipped. I gripped my phone, forcing my voice to stay calm. "What do you mean?" "Your mother has been crying all morning because you canceled the mortgage payment." His voice was sharp with anger. "Do you have any idea how much this house depends on you? Do you want us to end up on the street?" I laughed. A cold, hollow laugh. "Are you talking about the house I've been paying for all these years? The house I sacrificed my youth to keep for you, and you really think I'd keep doing that after you abandoned me on my wedding day?" There was a heavy silence on the other end, then a scoffing chuckle. "You're so selfish. Family doesn't abandon each other, Maya." I tightened my grip on the phone. Family doesn't abandon each other? Then what about them? What had they done on the most important day of my life? They had chosen Sophie. They had chosen that glittering party over standing by my side at my wedding. I took a deep breath. "You're right. Family doesn't abandon each other. And you abandoned me. So I'm done too. I'm not paying the mortgage anymore. No more bills. No more money for Sophie. From now on, I'm not your bank." "Maya, don't be stupid. You can't do this." "I can. And I just did." I hung up before he could say another word. My heart pounded in my chest, but not from fear. From freedom. Daniel watched me, waiting. I set my phone down, feeling as if I had just shed an invisible chain that had weighed me down for years. "I'm done," I said, my voice light as air. Daniel didn't ask any questions. He simply pulled me into his arms, his hand running gently through my hair in silent reassurance. "Whatever you need," he murmured, "I'm here." The final call and the ultimatum. My father wasn't one to give up easily. They were used to treating me like their lifeline, and when they saw me pulling away, they decided to take a gamble by threatening me. A week later, while I was busy making plans for my small bakery, a letter appeared at my door. No fancy envelope, no flowery words, just a cold, impersonal statement scrawled on a piece of paper. "As of today, Maya Jane Pierce is no longer our daughter. You chose selfishness over family. All ties are permanently severed. Robert and Linda Pierce." I read it 3 times. The bold, stark letters etched themselves into my mind. They had chosen to erase me from the family because I had stopped paying for them. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer where it would never be opened again. Daniel walked into the kitchen and found me standing there, motionless. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking to the letter in my hand before he took my fingers in his own. "They don't deserve you." I looked at him, then at the bakery I was about to build. At the life I was beginning, one free from people who only saw me as an ATM. "I know," I said. They had declared that I was no longer part of their family, but the truth was, I had erased them from my life long before that. A new beginning, no more calls demanding money, no more overdue bills, no more responsibilities I never volunteered for. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. The money I used to send them every month, I invested it in myself. I found an old mixer, rented a small stall at the farmer's market, and started baking, something I had always loved but never had the time to pursue. It was small, but it was mine. No one could take it from me. Every morning, when I opened the oven and let the warm scent of freshly baked bread fill the air, I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen myself. And this was just the beginning. Building my own life. I belonged to myself. After cutting off my parents, I felt an emptiness. Not because I regretted it, I knew I had done the right thing, but because I had been so used to being tied down. My whole life had revolved around them, around bills, around responsibilities they had dumped onto me. And now there was nothing left to carry but myself. The tiny apartment Daniel and I shared became the only place I truly felt safe. But it was also eerily quiet. No more angry calls from my father, no more long texts from my mother demanding money. I was truly free. I just didn't know what to do with that freedom. Before, money had flowed out of my account like water. My parents' bills, my mother's late-night sob stories about Sophie, the fabricated crises they used to keep me tethered. Now, my money was mine. I checked my bank account in the mornings and didn't feel anxious, but I also felt lost. Daniel watched me struggle in those first few days after the decision, his eyes full of concern. One morning, as I sat quietly by the window, staring at the overcast sky, he handed me a cup of coffee and said simply, "You can start over. Choose something you love." I looked at him, blinking. Something I love. Without thinking, my mind drifted to flour-dusted countertops, to the late nights I had spent kneading dough after long shifts, to the scent of warm bread filling a tiny kitchen. I had loved baking once, but I had never been able to pursue it, because I had always been too busy saving my family. I decided to try. From a small farmer's market stall to my own dream. With the money I once sent home every month, I bought an old mixer. Not a fancy one, but good enough to get me started. Every day, I woke up before sunrise, kneading dough, experimenting with recipes, making the pastries I had always dreamed of. For the first time in my life, I wasn't doing something for someone else. I was doing it for me. Daniel helped me find a small stall at the farmer's market, where people sold fresh produce, honey, and handmade goods. I rented a tiny space, hand-painted a wooden sign that read, "Maya's Morsels," and laid out my first batch of pastries on a little table. On the first day, I was so nervous I could hardly breathe. I was terrified that no one would care, that my pastries wouldn't be good enough, that this was all just a delusion. But then, an elderly woman bought 6 scones, smiled at me, and said, "These remind me of when my grandmother used to bake." I nearly burst into tears on the spot. Somehow, I had created something meaningful, even if it was just a few small pastries. In the weeks that followed, I sold out within hours. I got used to standing behind my stall, smiling at customers, taking money from unfamiliar hands without feeling pressure. For the first time, I wasn't someone's bank. I was just a baker, doing something I loved. A new family. The ones who stayed. I wasn't alone in this journey. Daniel was my first supporter, but I soon realized I had more than just him. One morning, his mother, Ellen, stopped by my stall and handed me a bag of linen napkins. "Use these to line your baskets. It'll make them look nicer." She said it so casually, as if she had always been a part of my life. His father, Tom, built wooden shelves for my stall, free of charge. "This is what family does," he said with a warm smile. That's when I realized, family isn't about blood. It's about the people who choose to stay. After months of hard work, I finally rented a small storefront and opened my own bakery. On opening day, the shop was packed. Neighbors, customers from the farmer's market, even the pastor who had officiated our wedding. Ellen brought flowers. Tom fixed a leaky faucet. Daniel wrapped me in a tight hug. No empty chairs, no belated apologies from my parents, just people who truly loved me, valued me, and chose to stay. I don't need them to be happy. A year after cutting off my parents, I stood in my bakery, looking out the window at the bustling street, feeling lighter than ever. My parents never reached out. I didn't know how they were doing, didn't know if Sophie was still wreaking havoc on their lives, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. I didn't need them to succeed. I didn't need them to be happy. For the first time in my life, I belonged to myself, their downfall, and a desperate plea. Life gradually settled into place after I left my parents behind. Maya's morsels grew stronger each day, and I no longer felt empty or lost like I had in the early days after cutting ties. I had learned how to live for myself, without chasing anyone, without carrying anyone's burdens but my own. But the ghosts of my past hadn't completely disappeared. For almost 2 years I heard nothing from them. No calls, no messages, no letters. I had assumed they had completely erased me from their lives, which was fine because I had done the same long before. But then the rumors started to spread from distant relatives. Rumors of my old family's downfall. One morning, as I was arranging the pastry display in my bakery, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw the name Aunt Claire, my mother's older sister. I hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. "Maya, how have you been?" Her voice was gentle, but there was a hint of hesitation. "I'm fine. What's going on?" I asked cautiously. She sighed. "I thought you should know. Your parents are in serious trouble. The house has been foreclosed. They have no money left. Sophie ran off with her new boyfriend and took every last penny they had." I closed my eyes, feeling an unfamiliar wave of emotion wash over me. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't pity. It was just emptiness. "And now they need my help?" I let out a dry laugh. "They didn't say that." Claire hesitated. "But they're struggling. Your father's been drinking more. Your mother has been selling off furniture just to get by. I just thought that if you could..." "Could what?" I cut her off. "Send them money? Help them stay stuck in the cycle they created? Do you even know what they did to me?" Silence. She knew. They all knew. But instead of standing by me back then, they had stayed quiet. "I just wanted you to think about it," she murmured before hanging up. I set my phone down on the counter, feeling my heartbeat slow. They had truly lost everything. And now they're hoping for a miracle from me, the very person they discarded without a second thought. But what they didn't realize was that I was no longer the Maya they had abandoned. They came back, but I was already gone. They didn't call. They didn't text. Instead, on a cold November evening, they showed up at my door. I had just gotten home from a long day at the bakery, still holding a bag of ingredients, when I heard a firm knock at the door. 3 knocks. Strong. Purposeful. I hesitated for a few seconds before walking over, glancing through the peephole. My parents. They looked worse than the last time I had seen them. My father was thinner, his eyes sunken, his hair grayer. My mother was curled up in an old coat, her eyes red and puffy. I opened the door, but I didn't invite them in. "Maya." My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Dad," I said calmly. They stood in silence for a few moments before my father finally spoke, his voice rough, exhausted. "Can we come in?" I crossed my arms. "We can talk right here." My mother looked at my father before swallowing hard. We were wrong." I raised an eyebrow. "We shouldn't have abandoned you on your wedding day. We shouldn't have treated you like a bank. We relied too much on you, and when you left, everything fell apart." My father stood still, saying nothing, but I saw his fingers clench into a fist. "You've always been strong," my mother continued. "We thought you would always be there to help, but we were wrong. And now, we have nothing." The cold wind swept through the hallway, but I didn't feel it. I only felt hollow. "So what do you want from me now?" I asked. My mother broke down in tears. Maya, can you help us? Just a little, please. I looked at her, then at my father, the man who once screamed at me through the phone, the man who declared I was no longer his daughter. Now he stood here, begging me for help. And that was the moment I realized I was finally free from them. The door closed. The past no longer mattered. No, I said gently but firmly. My mother gasped, tears still streaming down her face. You can't forgive us? I tilted my head. I have forgiven you, but forgiveness doesn't mean I have to go back. My father gritted his teeth. We're family, Maya. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Family? Where was my family on my wedding day? Who stood by me when I needed them most? He had no answer. Family doesn't abandon each other, I said, throwing his own words back at him, the same ones he used against me 2 years ago. You made your choice, and I've made mine. I'm not coming back. I took a step back, placing my hand on the door. Good luck. And then I shut the door, closing that chapter of my life for good. I stood in the dark for a long moment, listening to their footsteps fade away. No regret, no pain, just peace. Letting go and freedom. My life without them. I stood there for a while after the door closed. For the first time in years, I felt nothing when I thought about them. No pain, no anger, no longing for their approval. Just a deep, quiet stillness inside me. They had come to me for help, but not because they realized their mistakes, not because they genuinely cared about me. They had only come because they had no one else left. But I was no longer their daughter. I was free. Free from the cycle of guilt and obligation they had trapped me in for years. I turned away, walked back inside, and pulled the curtains closed. They left without another word. And this time, I wouldn't look back either. The first day of my new life. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling, lightness. No more weight pressing down on my shoulders. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, filling the small bedroom that Daniel and I shared. I turned to look at him, still fast asleep, his face peaceful, as if there was nothing in the world to worry about. I smiled softly, feeling a quiet sense of peace settle inside me too. No more messages from my mother, complaining about money. No more angry phone calls from my father, accusing me of abandoning the family. No more guilt that they had burdened me with since childhood. For the first time in my life, I was truly living for myself. A new bakery and a new milestone. Maya's Morsels was thriving more than ever. After cutting ties with my parents, I poured everything into building my bakery. Business was booming. Customers kept coming back, sales kept growing, and soon I had to hire more staff, expand the menu, and even consider moving to a bigger space. Daniel was the first to suggest it. One evening, as we were having dinner, he slid a piece of paper toward me, a lease agreement for a new location. "What if you opened another bakery?" he asked casually. I stared at him, wide-eyed. "Are you serious?" He nodded, taking my hand. "You've done more than you ever thought you could. You can expand, build something long-term, not just for yourself, but for our future." Our future. 3 simple words, but they filled me with warmth. There was no future where I had to carry the weight of others anymore. No more sacrificing myself to support my old family. My future, our future, was only for the people I chose, and for the first time, I chose myself. Rumors and old memories. Even though I had cut ties with my parents, news about them still found its way to me through distant relatives. I heard they had moved into a trailer park, struggling to survive on whatever money they could scrape together from odd jobs. I heard my father was still bitter, still blaming me, still convinced I was an ungrateful daughter for refusing to help them. I heard my mother had cried a lot, but not because she missed me, because she couldn't believe I had truly let them go. And Sophie? She disappeared as if she had never existed. She left them with nothing but a mess, running off with another man, another life, without looking back. They had protected Sophie their entire lives, always choosing her over me. And now, she had abandoned them just as they had abandoned me. The irony of fate. But I didn't laugh. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt a vague sadness. Not for them, but for the version of myself that had once longed for their love. I had spent my whole life desperately trying to be chosen. I had given them everything, hoping to earn their recognition. But now I finally understood. They were never my real family. My real family. One spring afternoon, I stood in my new bakery, watching my employees serve customers, seeing the neatly arranged pastries on the shelves, smelling the warm sweetness of success. Ellen, Daniel's mother, walked in carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "Congratulations, sweetheart, the new place looks amazing." I froze for a second. Sweetheart, my biological mother had never called me that. But Ellen didn't just say it, she showed it. She had been there for me, cooking meals for us, supporting my dreams, helping in ways that didn't demand anything in return. I wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly had a mother. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the balcony watching the city lights shimmer in the night. He took my hand, his voice gentle. "Do you ever think about them?" I was silent for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Sometimes," I admitted, "not because I want to go back, just sometimes I wonder if things could have been different." Daniel squeezed my hand. "But if they were different, you wouldn't have the life you have now. You wouldn't have yourself the way you do now." I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. He was right. If my parents had been different, maybe I would still be trapped in that endless cycle, still sacrificing myself for them. But now, I was free. I had once been their daughter. But now I was simply Maya, a strong woman, a successful business owner, a person surrounded by a real family who loved me unconditionally. And this was the life I had always deserved. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. The past is a ghost, but I am no longer afraid. As time passed, the past felt like a ghost lingering somewhere in my memories. I no longer thought about my parents often, nor did my heart ache whenever someone mentioned them. I didn't care how they were living or whether they regretted their choices. The only thing I knew for certain was that I no longer belonged to them. But sometimes on quiet nights, as I sat by the bakery window watching people pass by, I felt a fleeting sense of wistful regret. Not regret for leaving them behind, but regret for the girl I used to be. The one who spent her whole life chasing love from people who would never give her enough. Family isn't blood. It's who chooses to stay are. I no longer had biological parents, but I had a different kind of family, one that I chose for myself. Ellen, Daniel's mother, cared for me more than anyone ever had. She helped decorate the bakery for holidays, brought hand-stitched napkins, and was always there when I needed someone to talk to. Tom, Daniel's father, always greeted me with a warm smile when I brought pastries to their house. He would ruffle my hair, like a real father would, and say, "You're doing great, Maya. We're proud of you." Every time I heard those words, a part of me melted, because they were the words my biological father had never once said to me. My life, without them. The bakery continued to thrive, and I poured my heart into building it. I had started with a small stall at a farmer's market. But now I owned 2 successful bakeries, had employees, and built a community of customers who loved what I created. Every morning, I woke up with joy, knowing that I was living for myself, not for anyone else. I was no longer the daughter who had to carry her family on her shoulders, no longer an investment they expected returns from. I was Maya Pierce, a strong woman, someone who had overcome everything to build the life she had today. I am chosen, no longer begging for love. Daniel and I started talking about having children. The thought used to terrify me, not because I didn't want a family, but because I was afraid of becoming my parents. I feared that I would hurt my child the way I had been hurt. But then, one day at the bakery, Ellen walked in with a small box. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled, pushing the box toward me. "Open it, sweetheart." I opened it, and inside was a tiny apron embroidered with the words, "Baby Pierce." I froze, tears welling up in my eyes. I looked up at her, and she just smiled gently. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Maya. Don't be afraid." And at that moment, I realized she was right. I was not my parents. I was not the kind of person who would turn her back on her own child. I was me, someone who had learned to love herself and those who truly deserved it. Closing one chapter, beginning another. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat outside a cafe across from my bakery, sipping hot tea and watching customers walk in and out. My life no longer had my biological parents in it. No Sophie, no burdens I never asked for, and I didn't need any of them. The ghosts of the past had faded, making way for a present filled with love, warmth, and freedom. I no longer chased love. Love had found me, in Daniel, in his family, in the people who chose to stay. I had once been abandoned, but now I was the one who decided who was allowed to stay in my life. And this time, I chose right. Lessons from Maya's story. Letting go. To live happily. In life, many of us experience pain from family, from the people we once believed would always love and cherish us. Maya Pierce's story is not just about the betrayal of her parents. It is about her journey of self-discovery, about learning to let go of what no longer serves her, and about creating a life that is whole and fulfilling. For those who have faced similar struggles, the most important lesson isn't holding on to the past. It's choosing yourself first, deciding what's best for your own well-being, and no longer sacrificing for those who don't appreciate it. 1. Family isn't just blood. It's who chooses to stay. Many people believe that family is forever, that no matter what happens, we must remain tied to them. But the truth is, family should not be an obligation. It should be a choice. The people who truly love us are not necessarily those who share our DNA, but those who stay by our side with no conditions attached. Maya spent years trying to earn her parents' love, giving them everything, only to be abandoned when she needed them the most. And when they came back, it wasn't out of love, it was because they needed her money. The lesson? Cherish those who genuinely care for you, whether they are relatives, friends, or chosen family. Sometimes, our real family is made up of people who have no obligation to stay, but do so anyway. Many people, especially older adults, carry lifelong burdens from family conflicts, unhealed wounds, and responsibilities they never asked for. But the truth is, we cannot live in misery just because we're afraid to let go. Maya chose to let go of her parents, and that didn't make her cruel or ungrateful. On the contrary, she was protecting herself from a lifetime of pain. And by doing so, she built a healthier, happier, and more successful life. If you are holding on to resentment, sadness, or obligations that no longer serve you, ask yourself, is it truly worth carrying this weight? If not, maybe it's time to put it down and start living a more meaningful, fulfilling life. Maya once believed that her happiness depended on her parents' love and approval. But in the end, she realized that true happiness comes from loving herself and building a life that fulfills her. For those who have spent their lives caring for others, children, family, friends, perhaps it's time to take care of yourself. Happiness doesn't just come from giving. It also comes from knowing when to hold on to yourself. Maya's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes we must let go of toxic relationships in order to truly live happily. Family isn't just blood, it's the people who love you unconditionally. So let go of what no longer serves you. and most importantly, love yourself first. The perfect preparation. A genius's counterattack. My name is Alexander Carter. I am 32 years old and a biochemist at Stanford University. I have dedicated my entire life to pursuing a single goal: developing a drug delivery system capable of targeting specific cancer cells, minimizing side effects, and maximizing treatment effectiveness. To me, this is not just a scientific endeavor. It is my dream, my ambition, and my way of carrying on the legacy of my mother, who was the founder and scientific heart of Carter Pharmaceuticals. This research journey began when I was a passionate graduate student. For over 5 years, I have spent most of my time in the lab, studying every compound, testing every reaction, and analyzing every result. I have not only worked tirelessly, but also meticulously documented and stored all data, knowing that even the smallest discovery could be the key to a groundbreaking breakthrough. This work has taken my time, my energy, and my youth. But I have never regretted it because I know these sacrifices are worth it. However, just as I reached a crucial breakthrough, one I was certain could revolutionize the pharmaceutical industry, my father coldly informed me that he would be transferring the patent for my research to my stepsister, Madison. She is only 25 years old, with no real achievements other than an unaccredited MBA from an online program. To my father, my scientific expertise, intelligence, and dedication seemed to hold no value compared to Madison's flashy marketing skills and attractive appearance. When I heard this over the phone, I felt my heart tighten and anger surged through my chest, but I remained calm. I had long anticipated this scenario. Ever since my father remarried 2 years ago, he had gradually pushed me out of major projects, restricted my access to the lab, and cut funding. I had sensed his shifting attitude, but had always tried to justify it with love and trust in my father. But now, everything was crystal clear. He was trying to erase me from the very research I had spent nearly my entire life developing. I was not going to sit idly by and watch my father steal my life's work. Instead, I had already reached out to my private attorney, Sarah Martinez, a trusted friend from college, to prepare a legal defense. I meticulously gathered all evidence proving that the core innovation of this drug delivery system was developed independently, outside of working hours, using my own resources, and had already been filed as a separate patent with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO, 3 months before my father's planned transfer. Faced with the painful betrayal of my own family, I decided this was not just a legal battle. It was a fight to reclaim my dignity and integrity as a scientist. I founded Carter Biotech, my own company, where my team and I continued developing this technology under strict ethical principles and true scientific values. Now, instead of relying on my father's control in the family business, I proudly stand on my own, ready to prove to the world that real science cannot be bought or stolen. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but I also understand that this is my chance to fulfill my mother's dream. A medical field built on honesty, integrity, and the power to change millions of lives worldwide. The perfect preparation, a genius's counterattack. Alexander Carter was not naive enough to be easily manipulated by his father. When Robert Carter began sidelining him from projects, gradually cutting off his access to the lab, and quietly promoting Madison, Alexander saw right through it. A power play was unfolding, and if he didn't prepare, he would lose everything. But Robert had miscalculated. Alexander was not just a scientist, he was a strategist. From the moment he detected the first signs of betrayal, Alexander did not complain or react rashly. Instead, he observed, calculated, and planned. He reached out to Sarah Martinez, one of the top intellectual property lawyers in the country. When she heard Alexander's story, she was not surprised. She had seen too many cases like this. brilliant minds robbed of their work by their own families, companies, or institutions. But Alexander was different. He wasn't the type to surrender. Sarah devised a meticulous plan, leaving no loopholes. First, Alexander started collecting all evidence of the restrictions imposed on him by the company. Emails, lab access denials, financial records. Everything was carefully documented. Every time he was excluded from an important meeting, he took note. Every move Robert and Madison made was closely monitored. But the most crucial move? Alexander had quietly filed for an independent patent with the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Robert Carter might be the CEO of Carter Pharmaceuticals, but he did not own his son's brilliant mind. The core components of the research, the most groundbreaking discoveries, were developed using Alexander's personal equipment and resources. Legally, this created a clear distinction. Carter Pharmaceuticals may have funded parts of the research, but they had no intellectual property rights over innovations developed outside the company's domain. Robert Carter believed he could simply push his son aside and hand over the entire project to Madison like a gift. But what he didn't know was that Alexander had set a trap. When he received the call from his father, announcing that the research had been transferred, Alexander simply tightened his grip on the phone, the corner of his lips curling into a cold smile. Robert thought he had won, but in reality, he had just stepped onto a minefield Alexander had laid out in advance. "I hope Madison enjoys trying to commercialize research she doesn't understand," Alexander said, his voice unnervingly calm. As soon as the call ended, he sent a message to Sarah. He did exactly what we expected. The real battle had just begun. The legal battle. When the betrayer lights their own fire of destruction. Alexander Carter stepped out of the laboratory, unwavering. He had spent months preparing for this moment, and now everything was unfolding exactly as he had predicted. Robert Carter and Madison thought they could steal his research without consequences. But they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the person they were up against. The moment Robert attempted to submit the patent transfer, a series of alerts were immediately triggered at the USPTO, United States Patent and Trademark Office. Because Alexander had already filed his patent months earlier, any attempt to claim ownership would automatically be investigated. A comprehensive review was launched, and within hours, the truth began to unravel. At Carter Pharmaceuticals, tension filled the air. The company's lawyers scrambled in panic as they discovered that Robert had authorized the transfer of an asset he had no legal right to. Madison's confidence also began to crack when she received an email from the legal department with the subject line, "Urgent, request for explanation on patent ownership." She might have been able to manipulate Carter Pharmaceuticals' leadership, but she couldn't deceive the legal system. While the company descended into chaos, Alexander walked into his attorney's office, where Sarah Martinez and her legal team were already prepared. She tossed a thick folder onto the table, her sharp eyes locking onto Alexander. "They've backed themselves into a corner. Now we're going to make them pay for it." Alexander nodded. There was no way out for Robert and Madison now. If they admitted to knowingly stealing the patent, they would face a severe intellectual property violation, leading to massive fines and millions in damages. If they denied responsibility, Carter Pharmaceuticals' entire leadership team would be subjected to an internal investigation for gross negligence in legal procedures. Either way, the company would suffer significant damage. And most importantly, they could no longer stop Alexander. When Robert realized he had been cornered, he did what desperate men always do. He called Alexander. "We need to talk." His voice was more strained than ever. Alexander smirked, glancing at the official document from the USPTO confirming that the investigation had formally begun. The man who once controlled everything was now losing his grip. "Yes, we definitely need to talk," he replied, his voice as calm and sharp as a blade. Robert Carter thought he was the one in control. But in reality, he had set himself on the path to his own downfall. The rise of Carter Biotech, when the outcast becomes the leader. Alexander Carter had nothing left to hold on to at Carter Pharmaceuticals. The company his mother once co-founded had become a machine driven solely by profit, where scientific integrity was nothing more than an afterthought. If his father wanted to steal his invention to maintain the company's power, then Alexander would build his own empire, one where real science was honored. Shortly after filing the intellectual property lawsuit, Alexander signed the paperwork to establish Carter Biotech. The company didn't just bear his name, it represented his ideals, his intellect, and his dedication. Carter Biotech didn't start with lavish offices or an extensive executive team, but it had something Carter Pharmaceuticals had long lost: a commitment to real science. Within days, talented individuals from Carter Pharmaceuticals began resigning to join Alexander's team. An email from one of the biggest biotech investors in the industry made Alexander smile. "We're interested in Carter Biotech. We don't invest in reputations, we invest in competence. Give us a reason to bet on you." This was the opportunity Alexander needed. He didn't need the Carter Pharmaceuticals name to succeed. He just needed recognition from those who understood the true value of scientific research. While Robert Carter scrambled to manage the fallout of his mistakes, and Madison faced mounting public pressure, Alexander had already moved far ahead. He didn't just protect his invention, he turned it into the foundation of a new company, a new future. Carter Pharmaceuticals was crumbling, but Carter Biotech was rising stronger than ever, and this time, Alexander was not just a sideline scientist, he was the leader. The desperation of Carter Pharmaceuticals, when the betrayers sink into their own pit. As Carter Biotech expanded rapidly with overwhelming support, Carter Pharmaceuticals was drowning in turmoil. The USPTO investigation placed the company under strict scrutiny. Partners began questioning the transparency of its business operations, and stock prices were in free fall. But the most devastating blow had yet to come. As the patent lawsuit escalated, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, launched its own inquiry. Legal experts began combing through Carter Pharmaceuticals' entire research and testing procedures, and shocking truths quickly surfaced. In an effort to maximize profits, Robert Carter had repeatedly approved shortened clinical trials, bypassing critical verification stages. This wasn't just unethical, it posed severe risks to patient safety, placing the company at the center of a major scandal. Financial news headlines blared. Carter Pharmaceuticals faces serious allegations of research violations. Shareholders panicked. They no longer trusted Robert Carter's leadership and realized the company could not survive if it continued down this path. An emergency board meeting was held, and within hours, the board made a decisive move. Robert Carter was immediately removed as CEO. As the news spread, Madison also found herself trapped in the storm. She had tried to position herself as a visionary leader, but when questioned by the media about her knowledge of the research, she crumbled. A viral video of her stumbling over basic scientific explanations about the drug delivery system became an industry-wide joke. Within less than a month, Carter Pharmaceuticals went from a powerhouse corporation to a directionless, crippled entity, drowning in lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Meanwhile, Alexander Carter, once cast aside, was now leading Carter Biotech into the future, backed by top scientists and powerful investors. The betrayers had sealed their own fate. And Alexander? He didn't just reclaim what was stolen, he surpassed anything they ever imagined. The fall of Carter Pharmaceuticals. When the truth can no longer be hidden. Carter Pharmaceuticals was once an empire, but now it was collapsing before the eyes of those who sought to control it. With Robert Carter forced out and Madison's credibility in ruins, the company became a rudderless ship, drifting between lawsuits and regulatory probes. Worse yet, the secrets Robert had tried to bury were now coming to light. The FDA investigation didn't just focus on the stolen patent. It unearthed a history of severe violations in research and development. Manipulated data, falsified reports, and dangerously accelerated clinical trials. All of it revealed that Carter Pharmaceuticals had prioritized profits over patient lives. When the FDA's official report was released, a flood of lawsuits from medical organizations and affected patients followed. The financial headlines painted a grim picture. Carter Pharmaceuticals faces unprecedented crisis. Can the company survive? Investigation uncovers shocking truth. Is Carter Pharmaceuticals on the brink of collapse? The cost of greed. When a pharmaceutical giant loses its ethics. The company that once stood at the pinnacle of the industry was now on the verge of ruin. Meanwhile, Carter Biotech soared, proving that real science, founded on integrity, vision, and innovation, could not only survive betrayal but rise above it. Alexander Carter had once been discarded, but now he was unstoppable. Meanwhile, at Carter Biotech, a true scientific revolution. At Carter Biotech, Alexander Carter was leading a true scientific revolution. His targeted drug delivery technology had been verified by top medical organizations and recognized by industry experts. Investors who had once backed Carter Pharmaceuticals were now pulling out and pouring their money into Carter Biotech, transforming Alexander's company from a promising startup into a formidable force in the pharmaceutical market. Robert Carter, once a highly ambitious businessman, was now a symbol of failure. When the media requested interviews, he refused to appear, avoiding the public eye. Madison, who once proudly called herself the future female leader, had become a laughingstock, ridiculed for her ignorance. The day Carter Pharmaceuticals officially lost its market dominance was the same day Carter Biotech signed a major partnership deal with one of the largest pharmaceutical corporations in the world. While Robert and Madison sank deeper into crisis, Alexander stepped onto the stage at a prestigious medical conference, presenting his research to thousands of experts. As he finished his speech, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. This time no one could steal his credit, no one could deny the truth. Alexander Carter had not only protected his invention, he had completely reshaped the pharmaceutical industry. Absolute victory. When justice and science prevail. Alexander Carter had won, but his journey was far from over. Carter Biotech had not only emerged from the shadows of Carter Pharmaceuticals, but it was also redefining industry standards. While his father's company was drowning in lawsuits, scandals, and the threat of bankruptcy, Carter Biotech was thriving, attracting the brightest minds in biochemical research. After the devastating FDA report, investment funds abruptly withdrew from Carter Pharmaceuticals, causing its stock price to plummet uncontrollably. In a desperate attempt to save the company, the board of directors reached out to Alexander, offering him the position of CEO. They knew that only he, the true innovator behind the breakthrough technology, could save the company from collapse. But Alexander had no interest in saving those who had betrayed him. When he received the offer, he simply smirked and rejected it outright. Carter Pharmaceuticals no longer had any value to him. It was the past, and he was focused on the future. Robert Carter, now a broken man, made one last attempt to reach out to his son. As he stood at the entrance of Carter Biotech's office, he was no longer the proud CEO he once was, but a man who had lost everything. "We can fix this. You know that, don't you?" Robert said, his voice low and desperate. Alexander folded his arms, his gaze cold and unyielding. "No, we can't." Robert stared at his son for a long time, and for the first time he finally realized the irreparable distance between them. Carter Pharmaceuticals had dug its own grave. The values that Alexander's mother had built had been betrayed long ago, and now the company was nothing more than an empty shell. Meanwhile, Madison also reappeared, But she was no longer the arrogant woman she once was. She had lost everything: her reputation, her opportunities, and the trust of anyone in the industry. But this time, she wasn't there to beg, nor to deceive. "I've enrolled in school again. Chemistry, biology. I want to understand the things I once thought I could control," Madison said, a hint of sincerity in her voice. Alexander studied her for a long moment before simply nodding. He had no reason to forgive, but he also had no reason to stand in the way of someone trying to start over. The story of Carter Pharmaceuticals ended as a harsh lesson in greed, betrayal, and the consequences of losing ethical values. But Alexander's story was just beginning. Carter Biotech had risen to the top, becoming a symbol of innovation, integrity, and true scientific commitment. As he stepped into a state-of-the-art laboratory where groundbreaking research was taking place, Alexander opened an old notebook that had once belonged to his mother. On the first page, she had written, "Let science be your guiding light. No one can take that light away from you." He smiled, placed his hand on the page, and moved forward. Because this wasn't just a victory, it was the beginning of a new era. A new legacy. When the light of science shines bright, Alexander Carter was no longer the young man who once stood in his father's shadow, seeking validation from a family that had betrayed him. He no longer needed anyone to define his worth. He had proven it himself in the biotechnology industry. Carter Biotech was more than just a company. It was a symbol of innovation, true science, and professional ethics. The downfall of Carter Pharmaceuticals became a cautionary tale in the industry, a clear reminder that greed and unethical business practices would never last. Meanwhile, Carter Biotech continued to expand, attracting top researchers, visionary investors, and patients who placed their hopes in cutting-edge medical technology. From a small startup, Carter Biotech quickly grew into an industry powerhouse. But Alexander didn't stop at just one project. He pushed forward into gene therapy, DNA editing technologies, and revolutionary cancer treatments. Every step Carter Biotech took was rooted in science, transparency, and ethics, the very things Carter Pharmaceuticals had long abandoned. On the day Carter Biotech announced its final clinical trial for its targeted drug delivery system, a major event was held, drawing hundreds of industry experts. As Alexander stepped onto the stage to unveil the results, no one could deny him anymore. "This is not just my achievement," Alexander said, his sharp yet proud gaze scanning the audience. "This is proof that science, when conducted with honesty and dedication, can change the world. And I promise you, this is only the beginning." The auditorium erupted in applause. Those who had once underestimated him, who had tried to erase him, could now only stand on the sidelines and watch Carter Biotech's rise. Madison was there that day, but she stood quietly in the back. She was no longer the woman who once boasted a false leadership title. She had lost everything. But she had learned a painful lesson. When their eyes met, Madison gave him a silent nod, a long overdue acknowledgement that Alexander had been right all along. Throughout the years, Alexander had fought not only to protect his intellectual property, but also to defend the true values of science. Now, standing at the pinnacle of his field, he did not look back with hatred, but with pride. Because the greatest revenge was not destroying those who betrayed him, but proving that they could never stop him from rising. And Alexander Carter had done just that. He had turned betrayal into motivation, pain into power, and his dream into reality. As one door closed, a new path had opened. And Alexander, now unstoppable, was just getting started. The lesson of Alexander Carter: the power of integrity and perseverance. The story of Alexander Carter is not just about a legal battle or a comeback from betrayal. It carries a profound lesson about the value of integrity, persistence, and self-belief. In life, justice is not always guaranteed. Sometimes the people we trust the most turn against us. But instead of being consumed by resentment or seeking revenge through destruction, the best way to fight back is through success and staying true to one's values. Patience and preparation are the greatest weapons. Alexander didn't let anger control him. Instead, he planned carefully, gathered evidence, and waited for the right moment to turn the tables. His story teaches us that strategic thinking and perseverance matter more than impulsive reactions. Most importantly, no one can steal your true worth. Wealth can be lost, reputations can be tarnished, but knowledge, experience, and integrity will always be the foundation to rebuild. At any stage in life, this lesson remains timeless. Stay true to your ethics, never compromise for short-term gains, and always believe in the path you've chosen.